your house is paid off. Your 401k just hit 7 figures. On paper, you won the game. You took Social Security at 62 because you ran the numbers. It made sense. Your advisor calls twice a year, says everything looks good, and bills you 120 basis points for the privilege. Then, on May 16, 2025, Moody's downgraded the United States government's credit rating. The last agency holding the AAA line finally let it go, and the market barely flinched. The news cycle moved on in 48 hours. Most people nodded and went back to whatever they were watching. So here's the question. If everyone shrugged it off, why did the 30-year Treasury yield instantly push above 5%? Why are bond prices moving in the exact direction that punishes the typical retirement portfolio? S&P did this in 2011, Fitch in 2023. So why does the third time feel different? It is different, not because of the downgrade itself, but because of where you are in the game when it lands. There are two entirely separate financial games. Most people never realize they're playing both. Game 1 is accumulation. You earn, you save, you invest, you wait. Patience is rewarded. Time heals mistakes. A bad year is just a buying opportunity. You played this for 40 years and you were great at it. Game 2 is decumulation. You flip the switch, you pull money out instead of putting it in. And here, almost everything you learned in Game 1 becomes dangerous if you apply it. Same accounts, same statements, same advisor saying the same things, but the rules just inverted. In Game 1, a market drop is good news, cheaper shares. In Game 2, an early drop can permanently break a 30-year plan. In Game 1, a credit downgrade is background noise. In Game 2, it's structural damage to the engine you now depend on. That's why Moody's matters to a retiree, and barely matters to someone who's 32 and still working. Here are the mechanics. In May 2025, Moody's stripped the last AAA, ending more than a century of unbroken top-tier status. S&P went first in 2011, Fitch in 2023. Moody's held alone for 14 years. Now all three agree. The reason is simple. For over a decade, federal debt rose sharply on continuous deficits. Spending climbed while tax cuts shrank revenue. As rates rose, interest payments exploded. Here's the number that should stop you scrolling. Interest could eat 30% of all federal revenue by 2035, up from 9% in 2021. The government is now borrowing, in large part, just to pay interest on money it already borrowed. That's the setup for a debt spiral, where both rates and debt keep climbing on each other. This isn't political. Both parties ran the deficits. I'm just showing you where the gears grind. The conventional wisdom prior downgrades caused no lasting damage. After 2011, the market recovered and ran for a decade. True, if you were 45 and still accumulating, the system absorbed the shock, you kept buying, you won. But if you were 68 in 2011, already drawing down, that same downgrade hit you differently. Bond prices dropped, yields rose, the cushion you built to absorb volatility lost value right when you needed it. Now it's 2026. You're in or near retirement. The 30-year yield jumped above 5% on the Moody's news. Remember, bond prices and yields move opposite. When yields rise, the bonds you hold fall in value. So your supposed safe floor is sinking at the exact moment you need it to hold. In Game 1, that's noise. You hold, you wait, bonds recover. In Game 2, you can't wait, you need income now. Every withdrawal locks in the loss. And those early losses compound in a way that's genuinely hard to recover from. Enter the 4% rule. Created in 1994 by Bill Bengen, withdraw 4% year 1, adjust for inflation, and your money lasts 30 years. A 50/50th or 75/25th stock bond makes survive 95% of all 30-year historical periods tested. Reassuring, right? Here's what 95% hides. Bengen built it on bond yields of 6% to 8%. Bonds were doing real work. By early 2026, the 10-year Treasury was around 4.3%, roughly half. Bonds carry far less of the load. Lower yields mean equities must work harder, which exposes you to the killer of Game 2 sequence of returns risk. Moody's stripped America's last AAA rating in May 2025. More than 100 years of unbroken top-tier status, gone. S&P went first in 2011, Fitch followed in 2023. Moody's held the line alone for 14 years. Now all three agree. The official reason is simple. Federal debt has climbed for over a decade on continuous deficits. Spending rose, tax cuts shrank revenue, and interest payments on old debt exploded. Here's the number to stop you cold. Interest could swallow 30% of all federal revenue by 2035. That was 18% in 2024, just 9% in 2021. The government now borrows to pay interest on what it already borrowed. That's the setup for a debt spiral. Higher rates, more debt, higher rates again. This isn't politics. Both parties ran the deficits. I'm just showing you where the gears grind. Your advisor will say the old downgrades caused no lasting damage. In 2011, the market recovered and ran for a decade. And if you were 45, still saving, still 20 years out, that recovery was yours. The system absorbed the shock, but if you were 68 in 2011, already pulling money, the same downgrade hit different. Bond prices dropped at the worst moment. Now it's 2026. You're in or near retirement. The 30-year Treasury pushed above 5%. Remember the rule. When yields rise, existing bond prices fall. So the bond slice of your 401k is shrinking exactly when you need it to be your safe floor. In game 1, that's noise. You wait, yields normalize, bonds recover. In game 2, you can't wait, you need income now. Every withdrawal locks in the loss. Meet the 4% rule. Built in 1994 by Bill Bengen, withdraw 4%, adjust for inflation. Last 30 years, a 50/50ths or 75/25ths portfolio survived in 95% of historical periods. Reassuring, right? Here's what 95% hides. Bengen built it on bond yields of 6 to 8%. Bonds did real work back then. By 2026, the 10-year yield's roughly half that. Near 4.3%, bonds carry less, so stocks must carry more. Which exposes you to the thing that kills retirements in game 2. Sequence of returns risk. 2 retirees. Both 65, both $1 million, both pulling 4%. The only difference is timing. Retiree A gets up years first, then a 25% drop later. She's fine. Retiree B takes the 25% drop in year 1. Same average return, ruined outcome. He's pulling $40,000 from a shrinking pile. When recovery comes, there are too few shares left to ride it. Now add the downgrade. It doesn't crash stocks, it pushes Treasury yields higher. Higher yields lower bond prices. Your 60/40s bleeds on both sides at once. Modern retirements run 30 to 40 years. Morningstar now models a safer start near 3.9%. 3.9 versus 4 sounds like nothing. It's $1,000 on a million. But it signals the old conditions are gone. 4% was only safe if the future looked like the past. Lower returns or higher inflation make it risky. The rule isn't wrong. It's being run by people who set their assumptions in 1985 and never rechecked. Now the fiscal picture. Interest on the debt is already bigger than Medicare or defense spending. Net interest went from $223 billion in 2015 to $345 billion in 2020, then nearly tripled to $881 billion in 2024. In 9 years, federal interest payments nearly quadrupled, then crossed $970 billion in 2025. It's now the third largest federal expense. Only Social Security and Medicare are bigger. Here's the connection. The government's 3 promises to retirees all need budget room. That room is vanishing. Less flexibility means future reform is likelier to mean benefit cuts means testing, or new taxes on retirees. I'm not saying Social Security disappears. I'm saying its safety net has far less room to maneuver than 15 years ago. Debt-to-GDP climbs from near 100% in 2025 to about 130% by 2035, says Moody's. When Japan crossed 130%, it spent 2 decades trying to grow out and never quite did. But Japan financed itself with high domestic savings. America leans on foreign buyers. And after 3 downgrades, those foreign buyers have more reason to demand higher yields before lending again. Trap 1 is the bond price trap. When yields rise, the value of the bonds you already hold falls. In decumulation, that decline can force you to sell at reduced prices just to fund your withdrawals. Trap 2 is inflation. It's the silent tax that erodes every dollar of fixed income you draw. Pull $60,000 a year, and 4% inflation quietly shrinks it to $49,000 in spending power within 5 years. You withdraw the same number every year. Your standard of living quietly declines. Trap 3 is the required minimum distribution. At 73, the IRS forces you to pull money out whether you need it or not. Distributions are set by your balance and the government life expectancy table. You don't control the timing. A bigger balance means a bigger RMD. A bigger RMD means more taxable income crammed into a single year. And here's the one that really stings. A larger RMD can trigger RMAA. RMAA is a Medicare premium surcharge on retirees whose income crosses certain thresholds. In 2026, a married couple above $212,000 pays significantly more for Medicare Part B. Follow the chain. The downgrade pushes yields up, nominal returns rise, portfolio values inflate, and next year's RMD grows. That larger RMD crosses an RMAA threshold. You now pay a health surcharge caused by the government's own fiscal behavior. That's a second order effect. Your advisor probably never walked you through it. Trap 4 is different. It isn't mechanical, it's behavioral. And it may be the most destructive of all. After 40 years of watching the number climb, people develop a deep physical aversion to watching it fall. The portfolio became proof of the work, the discipline, the gratification delayed. So when bonds drop and statements look ugly, they freeze, they stop spending and wait for a recovery. No vacation, no help for the grandkids, no kitchen renovation, no hearing aids. They die having preserved more than they needed, denied during the years they could still enjoy it. That's a different kind of failure. It never shows up on the statement, but it's real. Let me make this concrete. Meet Robert and Catherine, both 68, retired 2 years ago. 1.4 million in traditional 401k accounts. A paid-off house worth 600,000. Both took Social Security at 63. On paper it works. 94,000 a year in income. Healthcare covered. The simulation passes. Now run the tape forward. Taking Social Security at 63 locked their benefits 26% below the age 67 amount. Waiting could have meant 52,000 a year instead of 38. That 14,000 gap is bulletproof, market-proof income. They traded 14,000 of guaranteed income for 4 early years. The break-even is around age 80, and the couple retiring at 65 faces a 32% chance at least one lives past 95. Next, every dollar of that 1.4 million is deferred taxable income, not wealth. They're at the edge of the 22% bracket. At 73, RMDs on a grown balance hit roughly 60,000. Their gross income crosses the RMAA line for the first time. That's 8 to 10,000 a year in surprise Medicare costs, and because RMAA looks back 2 years, they get almost no warning. Third, their 40% bond sleeve already lost value as yields climbed. Roughly 45,000 of cushion simply evaporated. The bonds were supposed to be the floor. The floor dropped right when they needed it. Fourth, the house, 600,000 in equity, zero cash flow, completely illiquid until they sell or borrow. 12,000 in property taxes, a $35,000 roof, aging HVAC, real capital that costs money and earns nothing. Now stress it. Year 4, the market drops 20%. Now the crash, just a normal correction. With bonds already depleted, they're forced to sell equities into a down market. That's the sequence of returns trap closing. The plan that passed every simulation fails in the live environment because the simulation used assumptions that no longer apply. Robert and Catherine weren't reckless. They did everything they were told. The map was just drawn for a different territory. Picture the advisor smiling, saying treasuries always recover after a downgrade. True, and useless to a 68-year-old who can't wait 15 years. Or the family dinner. We're fine, we own the house. Nobody mentions 12,000 in taxes you can't eat. So here are the 3 moves that actually matter. Not platitudes, specific, structural decisions you can act on. Let me give you the 3 moves that actually matter here. Not platitudes, specific, structural decisions you can act on today. Move 1 is withdrawal order. Most retirees drain the traditional 401k first, simply because that's where the money sits. In a rising rate, rising tax world, that default is usually wrong. Every untouched dollar in that account is a tax bill compounding silently. If federal interest swallows 30% of revenue by 2035, there is a real case that tax rates climb. Your deferred dollars get taxed harder later. The smarter play in the 65 to 72 window before required distributions hit is to convert chunks of traditional money into Roth. Pay the tax now at known rates before required minimum distributions force the event on a schedule you don't control. This is Roth conversion laddering. It feels wrong to write a tax check you don't technically owe yet. But this is game 2. The rules inverted. Had Robert and Catherine converted $200,000 early, they'd have shrunk their future distributions, cut their Medicare surcharge risk, and built a tax-free reserve for down years. Move 2 is income sequencing in a high-yield world. With Treasury yields elevated, short-term bonds finally generate real reliable income. A 5% yield on a 2-year Treasury is real money. Liquid, reliable, and completely immune to stock market swings. This is the cash buffer strategy. Park 1 to 2 years of expenses in near cash, and you never have to sell stocks in a downturn. You draw from the buffer, let equities recover, then refill when markets normalize. That directly attacks sequence of returns risk. The downgrade, by keeping yields high, actually makes this strategy cheaper to run than it was during the zero-rate years. Move 3 is healthcare cost front-loading. Health inflation runs 2 to 3 times the everyday rate. A healthy couple at 65 will average $300,000 to $400,000 in out-of-pocket care over retirement. Most plans barely account for it. Health costs aren't smooth, they spike. A hip replacement, a cardiac event, a long hospital stay are near certainties over a 25-year retirement. The fix is a dedicated healthcare reserve, funded from Roth dollars where possible, so spending it never inflates your Medicare surcharge income. Pulling tax-free dollars to cover unpredictable threshold crossing costs is one of the highest efficiency uses of money you'll ever make. And the same fiscal strain that produced the downgrade is what casts doubt on Medicare's long-term generosity. Insulating yourself is part defense, part foresight. Let me bring this back to where we started. The house is paid off. The 401k crossed 7 figures. The advisor says everything looks good. Most of that is true, and none of it protects you from what a structural shift in the cost of government debt does inside a portfolio now in drawdown. The Moody's downgrade wasn't a crash. It wasn't the end of the dollar. It was one data point in a trend 15 years in the making. Here's what it means for retirees. The system is under more fiscal pressure than ever, and yields will likely stay elevated longer than old models assumed. Rising yields, rising taxes, rising health costs, and forced distributions create a compound pressure no single piece of the original plan was built to absorb. Moody's cited a dangerous convergence, rising interest costs, unsustainable deficits, and entrenched political dysfunction. By mid-2025, federal debt passed $36.2 trillion, 124% of GDP, interest payments projected above $1.3 trillion a year. Interest now overtakes even military spending. That is the system you are embedded in. That is game 2. So here are the 3 moves that matter right now. First, consider Roth conversions before required distributions and higher tax rates force your hand. Second, use today's elevated yields to fund a cash buffer that shields you from sequence of returns risk. Third, build a separate healthcare reserve funded with Roth dollars so a cost spike never trips the surcharge trap. None of this is exciting. None of it belongs on a motivational poster. But this is the math that actually decides outcomes. It's the difference between a retirement that survives the next 15 years on its original terms and one that quietly loses ground to a repriced system. Remember the 2 games? Game 1 rewarded patience and buying the dip. Game 2 punishes the very habits that made you successful. You played Game 1 brilliantly for 40 years. The task now is to stop applying its rules to a game with the opposite logic. Robert and Catherine did everything they were told. The problem was never them. The map they were handed was drawn for different territory. Audit your assumptions, sequence your withdrawals, fund your buffers before you need them. That is how a plan survives a repriced world. If this was useful, subscribe. 1 video a week, structural retirement math, no motivational filler. I'll keep showing you exactly where the gears are grinding.